Hello, dear students. In this video, we will learn about the process of evolution. At the end of this topic, you will be able to explain the concept of the theory of evolution, identify the scientists who contributed to its development, and explain how natural selection built on earlier ideas. This is this lesson's essential question. What is the process of evolution, and how does it lead to the diversity of life? Biological evolution means descent with modification, or small changes passed from one generation to the next. Over very long periods of time, these changes can lead to new species. A key idea of evolution is that all life on Earth shares a common ancestor. Fossils help show how organisms have changed through time. Evolution explains both how species are related and why life is so diverse today. People often wonder if evolution is a theory or a fact. The answer is both. Evolution is a fact because there is strong evidence that species change over time. The theory of evolution explains how those changes happen. Scientists continue to study the details, but there is no serious debate about whether evolution occurred. What's studied is how it happens. This slide shows how scientific knowledge is organized. A fact is an observation we can repeatedly confirm. A hypothesis is a testable explanation. A scientific law describes a pattern in nature. A theory explains why those patterns occur using strong evidence. These terms are not steps in a ladder. They serve different roles in science. In everyday language, people use the word theory to mean a guess or personal idea. In science, it means something very different. A scientific theory is an explanation supported by a large amount of evidence and repeated testing. Examples include cell theory and evolution by natural selection. These ideas are trusted because they explain many observations and continue to be tested. So in science, a theory is reliable, not uncertain. Evolution is defined as a change in heritable characteristics of populations over successive generations. Heritable means traits that can be passed from parents to offspring. Over time, these changes can lead to biodiversity or the variety of life on Earth. Evolution does not just affect species. It also influences individuals and even molecules like DNA. So evolution operates at many levels of biological organization. All life on Earth share a common ancestor known as Luca, the last universal common ancestor. Luca lived billions of years ago and represents the ancestral population from which all organisms descended. Scientists support this idea using genetic evidence shared across all forms of life. This explains why very different organisms still share basic cellular features. This slide shows how evolution creates both unity and diversity. Many organisms share similar body structures because they come from a common ancestor. At the same time, those structures can be modified for different functions. For example, wings can be adapted for flight in different ways. These changes are called adaptations, traits that improve survival and reproduction. This statement means that biology becomes clearer when viewed through evolution. Evolution helps explain why organisms have certain traits, how species are related, and how life has changed over time. Without evolution, biological facts can seem disconnected. With evolution, those facts form a meaningful pattern. This idea reminds us that evolution is central to understanding life. Now let us explore the development of the theory of evolution. For a long time, scientists believed that species were fixed and unchangeable. This idea came from the belief that life was created perfectly from the beginning, so there was no reason for species to change. If everything was already ideal, then evolution seemed unnecessary. This view dominated scientific thinking for centuries before new evidence challenged it. This slide shows how fossils challenged the idea that species never change. Scientists like Nicholas Steno studied fossils and realized they were the remains of once living organisms. Some fossils did not match any living species, suggesting extinction and change. This evidence showed that life on Earth had a history and that species could appear and disappear over time. By the early 1800s, scientists began to consider that species might change over time, a process called transmutation. Jean-Baptiste Lamarck supported this idea and suggested that traits acquired during an organism's lifetime could be passed on to offspring. This was an important shift because it directly challenged the belief that species were fixed and unchanging. This slide explains Lamarckism, one of the earliest ideas about evolution. Lamarck suggested that organisms could pass on traits they acquired during their lifetime. For example, he believed giraffes developed long necks by stretching to reach higher leaves, and that this longer neck was then inherited by their offspring. Although this idea helped start discussions about evolution, it is no longer accepted as correct. Geologists studied rock layers, called strata, and the fossils found within them. Scientists like William Smith showed that rocks are laid down in a specific order, and that different layers contain different fossils. This meant that different organisms lived at different times in Earth's history. Life on Earth has changed over long periods, and not remained the same. Fossils are preserved remains or traces of organisms that lived in the past, many of which are now extinct. When fossils are found in rock layers, scientists know the rocks and fossils are about the same age. By comparing fossils in different layers and locations, scientists can tell which organisms lived earlier and which lived later. This helps build a timeline of life on Earth. From 1831 to 1836, Charles Darwin traveled around the world aboard the HMS Beagle. During this journey, he observed a huge diversity of plants and animals in different environments. He noticed that organisms were well suited to where they lived, and began asking how these adaptations developed. These observations later led him to propose natural selection as the mechanism behind evolutionary change. This map shows the voyage of the HMS Beagle, which took Darwin around the world. During this journey, Darwin observed plants, animals, and fossils in many different environments. He noticed that similar species varied from place to place, especially on islands like the Galapagos. These observations made him question why organisms were distributed the way they were, and how species might change over time. Darwin explained natural selection in On the Origin of Species. He proposed that when resources like food are limited, individuals must compete to survive. Those with traits better suited to the environment are more likely to survive and reproduce. Over time, this leads to natural selection, where favorable traits become more common. Eventually, these accumulated changes can result in the evolution of new species. This diagram breaks natural selection into its main parts. First is overproduction. Organisms produce more offspring than can survive. Second is variation. Individuals differ in traits, and some variations are more favorable. Third is inheritance. These traits can be passed on to offspring. Natural selection favors individuals with helpful traits, allowing them to leave more offspring. Over time, this causes populations to change. Darwin observed patterns of inheritance and variation, but could not explain them at the genetic level. This slide shows variation within populations, such as differences in plants, animals, and humans. Individuals differ in traits like color, size, or shape, and many of these differences are inherited. Variation is important because it gives natural selection something to act on. If all individuals were identical, populations could not adapt to changing environments. This diagram shows a simple example of natural selection using beetles. At first, the population has variation. Some beetles are light-colored, others are dark. When the environment changes and the ground becomes darker, predators can more easily spot the light beetles. Those individuals are more likely to be eaten, while darker beetles survive. The survivors reproduce, passing on their traits. Over time, the population becomes mostly dark-colored. Alfred Russel Wallace was a British naturalist who independently developed ideas about evolution and natural selection. While exploring South America and the Malay archipelago, he collected thousands of plant and animal specimens. From these observations, Wallace noticed patterns similar to Darwin's, including how species vary by location. His work showed that natural selection was not a single-person discovery, but a shared scientific insight. In 1858, Wallace sent Darwin a letter outlining his explanation for evolution. Darwin realized their ideas were very similar, so they worked together to present their evidence. The following year, Darwin published On the Origin of Species, which made natural selection widely known. Although Darwin became more famous, Wallace's contributions were scientifically significant. This slide shows the timeline of ideas that influenced Darwin. Before Darwin, scientists studied fossils, geology, population growth, and gradual change. These earlier discoveries helped shape how Darwin thought about life and Earth's history. His voyage on the HMS Beagle allowed him to connect these ideas with real observations of living organisms. Evolution did not appear suddenly. It developed from decades of scientific work. Starting in 1863, Gregor Johann Mendel studied thousands of pea plants to understand how traits are passed from parents to offspring. He discovered that offspring receive traits from both parents, but some traits are dominant while others are recessive. His work revealed the basic principles of inheritance, which later helped explain how traits involved in natural selection are passed through generations. This summarizes Gregor Mendel's work with pea plants. He studied traits like flower color, seed shape, and plant height. Mendel discovered that traits come in pairs, and that one trait can be dominant while the other is recessive. His results showed consistent ratios in offspring, which revealed that inheritance follows clear rules rather than chance. This work laid the foundation for modern genetics. Darwin observed variation and inheritance, but didn't know how traits were passed down. Mendel's work explained that missing piece. Variation exists because of different genes, and inheritance ensures those traits can be passed to offspring. Natural selection then favors individuals with traits that improve survival and reproduction. In 1892, August Weismann proposed that only germ cells carry hereditary information. Changes to somatic cells, such as skills or physical changes acquired during life, are not passed on. This idea is known as the germ-plasm theory. It showed that inheritance is separate from an individual's experiences, directly contradicting Lamarck's theory. This diagrams explain the difference between germline cells and somatic cells. Germline cells produce sperm and eggs, so any mutation in these cells can be passed on to the next generation. Somatic cells make up the rest of the body, and mutations in these cells affect only the individual. Inherited traits and evolutionary change depend on mutations in germline cells, not somatic cells. This diagram shows how August Weismann tested Lamarck's idea of inherited acquired traits. He removed the tails of mice over many generations and observed their offspring. Even after 19 generations, all the offspring were born with tails. This showed that changes to body cells do not affect inheritance. Only genetic information is passed through reproductive cells as inherited, not physical changes gained during life. In the early 20th century, scientists began using genetics to understand how traits in populations respond to environmental pressures. Julian Sorel Huxley named this combined explanation the modern synthesis in 1942. By linking genes, variation, and natural selection, scientists brought Darwin's ideas back to the center of evolutionary theory with stronger evidence. This slide shows how several ideas came together to form the modern synthesis, also called neo-Darwinism. It combines natural selection, genetic variation, mutation, and Mendelian inheritance. Mutations create variation. Genes pass traits to offspring, and natural selection determines which traits become more common. Together, these processes explain how populations evolve over time. The modern synthesis theory of evolution explains that evolution is best understood by combining Mendelian genetics with Darwin's idea of natural selection. Genes are responsible for inherited traits, and changes in these genes can affect how populations evolve. The theory also emphasizes that evolution happens in populations, not individuals, and that new species form gradually through small genetic changes over time. So the key point is that genetics explains how natural selection actually works. To answer the essential question, evolution is the gradual change in the genetic makeup of a population over time, driven by natural selection, genetic variation, and genetic drift, leading to the diversity of life on Earth. To conclude, define descent with modification, identify one scientist who contributed to the theory of evolution, and give one example of natural selection in nature. Thank you for listening.